Okay, guys. Tonight we're extinguishing the flickering rushlights and drawing back the crude wooden shutters, taking a deep dive into an era far removed from our own brightly lit, perfectly temperate bedrooms. Imagine, if you will, the clamor of a medieval village at dusk, the distant braying of donkeys, the faint smell of wood smoke mingling with livestock, perhaps the muffled shouts from a nearby tavern. As night falls, the darkness outside is profound, pierced only by the moon and stars, and the internal sounds of your dwelling become amplified. The rustle of straw, the creak of timber, the quiet breathing of family members sharing a single cramped room. We're venturing into medieval slumber, not always easy, exploring a time when a good night's sleep was a battle against fleas' fear and a world utterly indifferent to your comfort. You probably won't survive this journey awake, but that's entirely the point, isn't it? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now, down in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a medieval peasant, or perhaps a humble craftsman living in a world that operates entirely by the rhythms of the sun. There are no electric lights to extend your day, no central heating to ward off the chill, and certainly no memory foam mattresses. Your bed is likely a simple straw pallet, perhaps shared with several family members, providing meager comfort against the hard-packed earth or rough wooden floor. The air might be damp and cold in winter, or stiflingly hot and insect-ridden in summer. Forget climate control. You're at the mercy of the elements, and those elements are often far from conducive to a restful night. Noise is another constant companion. If you're in a town, the sounds of animals, human activity, and perhaps even occasional revelry or street crime penetrate your thin walls. If you're in the countryside, the calls of nocturnal animals, the rustling of wind through trees, or the unsettling creaks of your ancient dwelling create a symphony of background noise that's anything but soothing. And let's not even get started on the insects. Fleas, lice, and various crawling creatures are your nightly bedfellows, ensuring that uninterrupted sleep is often a pipe dream. Beyond the physical discomforts, the medieval world was fraught with anxieties that undoubtedly stole many a night's rest. Life was precarious. Famine, plague, war, and banditry were ever-present threats. You lived in a deeply religious society where the fear of divine judgment and eternal damnation was real and pervasive. Every unexplained illness, every bad harvest, every sudden death could be seen as a sign of God's displeasure or the work of malevolent forces. How could one truly relax when the weight of sin, disease, and potential disaster pressed so heavily? Your sleep patterns themselves were likely different from ours. The concept of monophasic sleep, one continuous stretch of slumber, was far less common. Instead, many medieval people practiced biphasic sleep, meaning they would sleep for a few hours, their first sleep, wake for an hour or two for quiet contemplation prayer, or even a bit of work, and then return for a second sleep until dawn. This pattern was dictated by the absence of artificial light, forcing activity to cease after sunset and resume only with the sun. It sounds quaint, but imagine struggling to fall back asleep for your second round when worry gnaws at your mind. One quirky tidbit, the very idea of privacy, especially for sleep, was a rare luxury. Entire families, sometimes even multiple families, would sleep in a single room for warmth and security. This lack of personal space undoubtedly added to the challenges of finding peaceful repose. Historians still argue whether medieval people were simply more accustomed to these conditions and therefore less bothered by them, or if the prevalence of melancholy and nervous humors in medical texts points to widespread sleep-related distress. It's hard to imagine being truly undisturbed in such an environment. So, as you prepare to close your eyes, consider the medieval person wrestling with rough bedding, pervasive noise, and the deep anxieties of their precarious existence. Sleep wasn't a guarantee. It was a constant negotiation with a world that offered little in the way of comfort or quiet. And when that elusive slumber refused to come, they turned to a fascinating array of cures, born from a mix of ancient medical theory, folk wisdom, and profound spiritual belief. You've just settled into your medieval pallet, wrestling with the discomforts of the era. But what happens when, despite the physical exhaustion of a day spent toiling, sleep simply refuses to come? In the medieval mind, sleeplessness wasn't just a bodily malfunction. It often ascended to a far more profound and terrifying realm. This is where we delve into insomnia, a divine or demonic problem, exploring how medieval people attributed their restless nights to forces beyond mere physiology. Imagine a world where everything from a bountiful harvest to a sudden illness was interpreted through a spiritual lens. God's will, saints' intercession, or the malevolent influence of demons were the primary explanations for both good fortune and profound suffering. Sleeplessness, especially prolonged or distressing insomnia, fit neatly into this framework. If you found yourself wide awake night after night, your first thought might well be that you had sinned and that God was withholding the gift of sleep as a form of divine punishment or a call to repentance. Perhaps you had committed a transgression, engaged in forbidden thoughts, or neglected your spiritual duties. The torment of insomnia became a tangible manifestation of your unworthiness, a nocturnal penance. This belief often led to fervent prayer, acts of penance or confession, hoping to appease the Almighty and regain the peace of slumber. Conversely, sleeplessness could also be attributed to demonic influence. Demons were seen as active agents in the world, capable of inflicting both physical and spiritual torment. A demon might whisper disturbing thoughts into your mind, conjuring terrifying visions, or simply keeping you awake to tempt you into despair or sinful thoughts. Nightmares, especially vivid or recurring ones, were almost certainly attributed to demonic attack. You might suspect you were being plagued by an incubus or succubus or simply a lesser demon bent on tormenting your soul. This fear would understandably amplify the distress of insomnia, turning a physical discomfort into a battle for your immortal soul. This spiritual interpretation of insomnia meant that seeking relief wasn't just about finding a physical remedy. It was about spiritual warfare. You might engage in intense prayer, recite psalms, make the sign of the cross, or even sleep with holy relics or blessed objects under your pillow. Exorcisms or simpler forms of spiritual cleansing might be performed in extreme cases of perceived demonic possession causing the sleeplessness. It wasn't a matter of chemical imbalance. It was a matter of divine displeasure or demonic oppression. One particularly quirky tidbit is the concept of the night hag, a malevolent spirit or demon thought to sit on your chest, causing a feeling of pressure, breathlessness, and paralyzing terror during sleep paralysis. While modern science explains this as a neurological phenomenon, for the medieval person, it was a very real, terrifying, demonic encounter that robbed them of peaceful rest. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these spiritual explanations for insomnia reflected a genuine lack of physiological understanding, or if they were a powerful cultural framework that helped people cope with phenomena for which they had no other explanation. It was likely both, where the spiritual provided the default lens through which all inexplicable suffering was viewed. So as you toss and turn in your medieval bed, the shadows dancing on the walls, remember that your sleeplessness isn't merely a result of bad digestion or a noisy neighbor. It could be God's silent rebuke urging you to examine your conscience, or the insidious work of a demon trying to corrupt your soul. And against such mighty forces, a simple cup of chamomile might not be enough. You'd need prayers, blessings, and perhaps even a visit to the local priest to wage your nightly battle for peaceful oblivion. You've explored the spiritual terrors that might haunt a sleepless medieval night, from divine wrath to demonic whispers. But beyond these supernatural explanations, there was a deeply entrenched pseudo-scientific framework that dominated all medieval medical understanding, including the causes and cures for insomnia, humoral theory, and imbalance. Imagine doctors, or even knowledgeable laypersons, meticulously categorizing every ailment, every emotional state, and every individual according to the delicate balance of 4 fundamental bodily fluids. This ancient Greek theory, largely inherited through Roman and Arab scholarship, posited that the human body was composed of 4 primary humors: blood associated with air, hot, and moist; sanguine temperament; yellow bile associated with fire; hot and dry, choleric temperament; black bile associated with earth, cold and dry, melancholic temperament; phlegm associated with water, cold and moist, phlegmatic temperament. Good health, in this view, was a state of perfect balance among these humors. Illness, including insomnia, was a result of an imbalance, too much or too little of one humor, or a humor that was corrupted, or of the wrong quality. So, if you suffered from insomnia, a medieval physician wouldn't ask about your stress levels or your sleep hygiene. Instead, they would try to determine which humor was out of whack. Sleeplessness was very often attributed to an excess of black bile, leading to a melancholic temperament. Black bile was considered cold and dry, and its excess could cause a restless, anxious mind full of dark thoughts and unable to find repose. Your brain might be too dry or too cold, preventing the natural, soothing moistness needed for sleep. Alternatively, an excess of yellow bile could lead to a choleric state characterized by anger, agitation, and a feverish restlessness that also precluded sleep. Or perhaps an excess of blood could make you too sanguine, too energetic and hot to settle down. The diagnosis dictated the cure. The remedies, therefore, were designed to restore humoral balance. If you had too much black bile causing melancholy and sleeplessness, the physician would prescribe treatments to cool and moisten your brain and body, or to purge the excess black bile. This could involve specific diets, eating moist or cooling foods, herbal concoctions, herbs believed to have cooling properties, or even more drastic measures like bloodletting or purging to physically remove the offending humor. The physician's job was to assess your overall constitution, your natural humoral balance, the specific symptoms and external factors like the season or the stars to pinpoint the imbalance. Then, they would meticulously select treatments that would either increase or decrease specific humors, bringing you back to equilibrium. It was a complex holistic system, even if its underlying science was by modern standards flawed. One quirky tidbit about humoral theory is how it colored every aspect of life. Certain foods were classified as hot or cold, wet or dry, and careful dietary choices were made to maintain balance. Even specific times of day or seasons were associated with certain humors, further influencing perceived health and prescribed treatments. Historians still argue whether humoral theory, despite its scientific inaccuracies, provided a coherent and psychologically satisfying framework for understanding illness in an era without germ theory, giving both healers and patients a sense of control over ailments like insomnia. So, when you present your sleepless nights to a medieval physician, expect a detailed inquiry into your temperament, your diet, and perhaps even the color of your bodily excretions. They're not looking for sleeping pills. They're trying to rebalance the very fluids that flow through your veins, believing that once your humors are in harmony, blessed sleep will naturally follow. It's a beautifully intricate, if scientifically misguided system for understanding why the Sandman just isn't visiting you. You've delved into the complex world of humoral theory, where your sleeplessness is a matter of imbalanced internal fluids. But imagine if you lived a life deliberately structured around spiritual devotion, where every hour of the day and night was ordained by prayer and contemplation. This is the world of monastic life, structured sleep, a unique approach to managing rest that was both deeply disciplined and surprisingly practical, offering a fascinating contrast to the chaotic sleep patterns of the lay population. Imagine yourself as a monk or nun living within the quiet, ordered walls of a medieval monastery. Your life is governed by the divine office, a series of fixed prayer times that punctuate the day and, crucially, the night. This meant that the traditional biphasic sleep pattern, common for many medieval people, was particularly pronounced and formalized within monastic communities. Your first sleep. The prima dormitia would begin shortly after Compline. The last evening prayer, typically around 8 or 9 p.m., and last for a few hours. Then, in the deepest part of the night, perhaps around midnight or 1 a.m., the bell would toll for matins or vigils, the longest and most solemn prayer service of the day. You would rise from your bed, often a simple pallet in a communal dormitory, and make your way to the unheated chapel, joining your brethren or sisters in hours of chanting psalmody and silent contemplation. This could last for 2 or 3 hours. After matins, you would return to your bed for your second sleep, secunda dormitio, resuming your slumber until dawn, when the bell would ring again for lauds, the morning prayer. This structured interruption was not seen as a burden, but as an opportunity for spiritual communion, a sacred vigil in the quiet hours of darkness. This disciplined routine, while perhaps alien to modern sensibilities, actually offered certain advantages for managing insomnia, at least in theory. The regular schedule, the physical labor that filled the daylight hours, farming, copying manuscripts, tending to the poor, and the dietary simplicity, often vegetarian, with restricted indulgences, all contributed to a body ready for rest. The communal aspect of the dormitories, ironically, could also offer a sense of security that might alleviate some anxieties. Furthermore, the emphasis on prayer and spiritual discipline provided a mental framework for dealing with restlessness. If sleep wouldn't come during your first sleep, you could use the time for private prayer or spiritual reading, transforming potential insomnia into a period of devotion rather than despair. The monastic rule provided purpose to your waking hours, whether day or night. It was a rigorous lifestyle, but one that arguably offered a degree of mental fortitude against the torments of insomnia. One quirky tidbit: some monastic rules even had specific provisions for those who struggled with sleep during the matin service, perhaps allowing them to sit rather than stand during parts of the long vigil, or encouraging extra manual labor during the day to ensure exhaustion. Historians still argue whether the monastic life, despite its physical demands, genuinely fostered better sleep due to its rigid structure and spiritual focus, or if monks and nuns simply had a more formalized way of dealing with inevitable periods of sleeplessness, integrating them into their spiritual practice rather than viewing them solely as ailments. It suggests a powerful coping mechanism where insomnia became an opportunity for spiritual growth rather than just a medical problem. So, for a monk or nun, a sleepless night wasn't necessarily a crisis. It was a part of the spiritual rhythm, an invitation to deeper prayer, a period of silent watchfulness. While you, the layperson, might be desperate for a cure, the monastic approach offered a unique, disciplined way to live with and even embrace the elusive nature of medieval slumber. You've seen how medieval monks and nuns approached sleep with spiritual discipline. But for you, the common villager or townsperson, when sleeplessness struck, your first recourse was often far more practical and rooted in the earth beneath your feet. This brings us to the vast and often surprising world of herbal lore, nature's sedatives, where the garden, the forest, and the local apothecary became your pharmacy for troubled nights. Imagine a world where every plant held potential. Before synthetic drugs, before a deep understanding of isolated chemical compounds, people relied on centuries of accumulated wisdom passed down through generations about the properties of herbs. This was a form of empirical knowledge learned through observation. This plant makes me sleepy, or that leaf soothes my pain. For insomnia, certain herbs were consistently recognized for their soporific, sleep-inducing, or calming properties. Let's delve into a few common ones you might find yourself gathering or buying from a village herbalist. Poppy papaver, somniferum. This was undoubtedly the most powerful sedative available. While not always directly refined into crude opium, as in later eras, preparations from the poppy plant were widely used. You might find poppy syrup, or simply dried poppy heads, steeped in wine or water to create a strong decoction. The latex from the unripe seed pod containing opiates was highly effective at inducing heavy sleep and dulling pain, making it a go-to for severe cases, though its addictive properties were not fully understood, or at least not seen, as a primary concern next to immediate relief. It was the medieval equivalent of a heavy-duty sleeping pill. Lettuce, Lactuca sativa. Surprisingly, common garden lettuce was highly regarded as a mild sedative. The milky sap Lactucarium, found in the stem and leaves of wild lettuce varieties in particular, was believed to have mild opiate-like effects. You might eat a large salad of fresh lettuce before bed, or a lettuce water made by boiling the leaves. This was a far gentler approach than poppy and considered quite safe. Chamomile Chamomilum nobile, still a popular bedtime tea. Today, chamomile flowers were brewed into infusions to calm nervous agitation and promote sleep. Its mild sedative and anti-inflammatory properties made it a well-regarded, accessible remedy for a restless mind or an upset stomach, preventing sleep. Valerian valeriana, officinalis. Known for its distinctive, rather pungent odor, often described as smelling like dirty socks, valerian root was a powerful nervine calming agent and sedative. It was prepared as a tea or tincture and widely used for anxiety, nervous tension, and insomnia. Its effectiveness was well attested even if the medieval person didn't understand the biochemical mechanism. Hops humulus lupulus. Yes, the same hops used in beer. The dried cones of the hop plant were believed to have sedative properties. You might stuff a small pillow with dried hops and place it under your head, allowing the volatile oils to be inhaled as you lay down. This was a popular and gentle method relying on aromatherapy before the term existed. The preparation of these remedies was often simple, relying on infusions, steeping in hot water, decoctions, boiling tougher plant parts, or tinctures, extracting compounds in alcohol. These were often mixed with honey to improve palatability, or with wine, as alcohol itself was a common sedative. One quirky tidbit: some medieval herbals suggest that simply sleeping near certain plants, like specific kinds of willow or mandrake, could induce sleep or prophetic dreams, even without consuming them. This speaks to a holistic belief in the plant's energetic presence. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these herbal remedies was primarily due to their actual pharmacological properties, or if the placebo effect, combined with the calming ritual of preparation and consumption, played a significant role. It was likely a potent combination, especially for the milder herbs. So, when the long, dark medieval night stretched endlessly before you and sleep remained elusive, you didn't reach for a prescription bottle. You turned to nature's pharmacy, relying on the ancient wisdom of herbal lore, hoping that a cup of poppy tea or a hop-filled pillow would finally grant you the blissful, boring oblivion you so desperately craved. You've delved into the world of herbal remedies, finding solace in chamomile and poppy. But the medieval quest for sleep wasn't just about what grew in the garden. It was also meticulously tied to what you put on your plate. This leads us to dietary adjustments, food as medicine, where what you ate and drank was carefully considered for its ability to influence your humors and coax reluctant slumber. Imagine your medieval cook or your knowledgeable spouse carefully selecting ingredients, believing each bite could either bring you peace or plunge you deeper into a sleepless night. The humoral theory, as we discussed, was paramount. Every food, like every person, was classified as hot or cold, wet or dry. The goal was to consume foods that would balance your particular humoral imbalance, especially if sleeplessness was linked to an excess of dry black bile, meaning you needed more moist or cooling foods to bring tranquility. Here are some common dietary recommendations you might encounter if you were struggling to sleep. Lactuca sativa, lettuce. We touched on this as an herb, but it was also a popular food item specifically recommended for sleep, being classified as cold and moist. It was seen as ideal for counteracting the dryness associated with melancholic sleeplessness. A large salad before bed, perhaps dressed simply, was a common prescription. Milk, warm milk especially from a cow or goat, was widely believed to be a soothing, sleep-inducing beverage. It was considered moist and cooling, perfect for calming an agitated system. Often, it would be sweetened with honey, which was also thought to have calming properties. Honey. This golden sweetener wasn't just for taste. It was seen as a medicinal food. Its soothing properties, both for the stomach and the nerves, made it a frequent addition to bedtime drinks and remedies. Almonds and nuts. Certain nuts, particularly almonds, were considered moistening and nourishing. Eating a small handful before bed might be recommended to calm a dry, restless mind. Fatty broths and soups, rich warm broths made from meats, particularly chicken, were thought to be nourishing and easy to digest, providing gentle sustenance that wouldn't agitate the system. Their moist quality was also beneficial for counteracting dryness. Avoidance of hot or dry foods. Conversely, if your sleeplessness was attributed to an excess of hot humors, you'd be advised to avoid spicy foods, very salty foods, or highly alcoholic drinks beyond a small calming nightcap. Heavy, hard-to-digest meals close to bedtime were also universally discouraged, as they would agitate the stomach and prevent repose. Wine and beer. While alcohol could be seen as hot, a small measured amount of wine or ale, especially a more calming, less potent variety, was often recommended as a nightcap to promote drowsiness. The key was moderation to achieve relaxation without overstimulating the humors. The emphasis was on foods that were easy to digest, soothing, and aligned with the desired humoral balance. There were no calorie counts or macronutrient analyses. It was all about the inherent qualities of the food. Eating hot and dry foods, like highly seasoned meat, was considered stimulating and bad for sleep, while cold and moist foods were sedative. One quirky tidbit: some medieval medical texts even suggested that the dreams you had could be influenced by the foods you ate. Eating heavy, rich foods might lead to nightmares, while lighter, cooling foods could bring pleasant, tranquil dreams. Historians still argue whether the perceived success of these dietary interventions was due to subtle physiological effects, e.g., tryptophan in milk, the placebo effect, or simply the removal of aggravating foods that might indeed disrupt sleep. It was likely a combination of practical observation and deep-seated humoral belief. So, when the medieval night approached, and you felt that familiar stir of anxiety or agitation preventing sleep, you didn't just reach for a single herb. You looked to your entire meal, carefully selecting foods that would coax your humors into harmony, inviting the gentle, boring embrace of sleep through the very sustenance that fueled your medieval day. You've tried soothing teas and carefully balanced meals, all in the quest for medieval slumber. But the pursuit of sleep wasn't solely an internal affair. It also involved outward practices designed to purify and relax the body. This brings us to bathing and hygiene rituals, which, while rudimentary by modern standards, played a significant role in promoting a state conducive to rest and spiritual peace. Imagine a medieval person preparing for bed, not just by changing into night clothes, but by engaging in calming, albeit often simple, ablutions. You see, for the medieval person, cleanliness was understood differently than it is today. Full immersion baths might not have been a daily occurrence for everyone due to the effort involved in heating water and the practicalities of privacy and available facilities. However, ritual washing, particularly of the hands and face, was common and held both practical and spiritual significance. When it came to preparing for sleep, a warm foot bath would have been a highly accessible and deeply comforting ritual. After a long day of walking on uneven ground, working in the fields, or navigating cobbled streets, your feet would be tired and sore. Immersing them in warm water, perhaps with some added herbs like chamomile or lavender, known for their calming properties, would have provided immediate relief and promoted relaxation throughout the body. The heat would draw blood to the extremities, subtly cooling the core and signaling to the body that it was time to wind down. Beyond simple washing, the application of anointing oils and unguents was also common, especially for those who could afford them. These weren't just for fragrance. They were often infused with medicinal herbs believed to have sedative or calming properties. You might rub a small amount of oil, perhaps infused with rose lavender or even a milder form of poppy, onto your temples, your chest, or your pulse points. The gentle massage, combined with the aromatic properties of the oils, would have contributed to a sense of tranquility and prepared the body for sleep. Think of it as ancient aromatherapy and a comforting massage, all rolled into one. These anointing rituals often had a spiritual dimension as well. The act of anointing was frequently associated with blessing and purification. Using blessed oils or reciting prayers while anointing oneself could transform a simple act of hygiene into a spiritual preparation for the vulnerable state of sleep, hoping to ward off evil spirits or nightmares. It was about purifying both body and soul before entering the realm of the unconscious. For the more affluent, a full warm bath, if available, would be a luxurious and effective means of promoting sleep. The immersive heat would relax muscles, soothe aches, and prepare the body for rest. Such baths might also include herbal infusions or aromatic waters to enhance the calming effect. One quirky tidbit about medieval hygiene. While general bathing might have been less frequent than today, specific ritual washings, like washing hands before meals or after certain activities, were more commonplace, imbued with both practical and religious meaning. This distinction highlights that cleanliness was not just about removing dirt, but about ritual purity. Historians still argue whether the physical effects of these bathing and anointing rituals were consciously understood, e.g., warmth leading to relaxation, or if their perceived effectiveness was primarily attributed to their spiritual significance and the power of ritual itself. It was likely a blend of both, with practical comfort being amplified by deep-seated belief. So, as you prepared for your medieval slumber, It wasn't just about finding a comfortable spot. It was about a conscious effort to cleanse and soothe your body, perhaps with the aid of warm water and fragrant oils, inviting the elusive embrace of sleep through a combination of physical comfort and spiritual preparation, setting the stage for a more peaceful, if fleeting, night's rest. You've tried the calming baths and aromatic oils, seeking physical and spiritual purification for a peaceful night. But in the medieval world, where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural were wonderfully porous, sometimes you needed a little extra help, a tangible piece of magic to ward off restless nights. This leads us to amulets and charms, magical aid for sleep, where objects themselves were imbued with protective power, placed under pillows or worn on the body to coax slumber and repel nocturnal malevolence. Imagine a world where superstition and profound faith walked hand in hand. Every unusual object, every curious stone, every scrap of parchment could hold a hidden power. For those tormented by insomnia, particularly when attributed to demonic influence or ill wishes, an amulet or charm was a direct personal defense, a silent guardian against the terrors of the night. These charms took many forms, drawing from Christian piety, ancient pagan traditions, and local folk magic, religious amulets. The most common and widely accepted were those with Christian significance. You might sleep with a crucifix, a rosary, or a small relic, or a purported relic of a saint under your pillow or hanging above your bed. These were believed to imbue the sleeping space with divine protection, warding off evil spirits and bringing peaceful, blessed sleep. Small pieces of consecrated bread or blessed salt might also be kept nearby. Written charms, apotropaic texts, perhaps more directly magical. These involved writing specific prayers, biblical verses like Psalms, known for their comforting qualities, or even obscure incantations on small pieces of parchment or cloth. These would then be folded, sometimes sewn into a small pouch, and worn around the neck, tied to the bedpost, or placed directly under the pillow. The power was believed to reside in the sacred words themselves, actively repelling nightmares and ensuring restful sleep. Herbal charms. Beyond consuming them, certain herbs were used as protective charms. A small bag of dried mandrake root, despite its poisonous nature, when ingested, might be placed near the bed for its supposed mystical properties, to induce sleep and ward off evil. Branches of rue or St. John's wort, known for their protective qualities against witchcraft and evil spirits, might be hung in the sleeping chamber. Natural objects, certain stones, animal parts, or even curious pieces of wood were believed to possess intrinsic powers. For instance, a jetstone was sometimes thought to absorb negative energy and bring calm. A small toad bone, don't ask how you got it, might be kept for luck or to prevent nightmares, though this leans heavily into darker folk magic. Symbolic objects, objects associated with sleep or tranquility were sometimes used. A small wooden cradle or a miniature bed might be placed as an offering or charm to invite sleep. The belief in these amulets wasn't necessarily seen as contradictory to Christian faith. Rather, they were often viewed as channels for divine power or as a way to actively combat the very real spiritual threats that could steal one's peace. For a medieval person, the world was alive with unseen forces, and these charms provided a tangible defense. One quirky tidbit about these charms is how specific some instructions could be. For instance, a charm to prevent a child from crying at night might involve placing a piece of bread previously eaten by a dog under the child's head, or tying a string from a spinning wheel around their neck. These often bizarre practices highlight the blend of desperate folk remedies and earnest belief. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these amulets was primarily due to the potent placebo effect, deeply ingrained cultural beliefs, or if they sometimes provided genuine psychological comfort that facilitated sleep. It was likely the latter, providing a feeling of control in an otherwise unpredictable world. So, as you lay in your medieval bed, the rustling straw, your only pillow, you might reach out, touch the small crucifix hanging above you, or feel the lumpy charm tucked beneath your head. These weren't just trinkets. They were your last line of defense against the terrors of the sleepless night, a whispered prayer in tangible form, guiding you toward a peaceful, albeit often brief, oblivion. You've surrounded yourself with protective charms and ancient herbs, doing everything physically possible to coax sleep. But in the deeply pious medieval world, when all else failed, the most profound and universally accessible remedies for insomnia were found not in physical objects or concoctions, but in the realm of the spirit. This leads us to prayer and penance, spiritual solutions for restless nights, where a sleepless vigil could become a profound act of devotion or a desperate plea for divine intervention. Imagine yourself in the dark quiet of your medieval home, the torment of insomnia setting in. Your first thought might not be for a herbal tea, but to fall to your knees. In a society where God's presence was felt in every aspect of life, and where salvation was the ultimate goal, sleeplessness was often interpreted as a spiritual affliction. It could be seen as a test of faith, a consequence of unconfessed sin, or a direct attack from demonic forces seeking to lead you into despair. Therefore, the remedy lay in spiritual action. Prayer was the most immediate and universal recourse. You would recite psalms, known for their comforting and protective qualities. The Paternoster Lord's Prayer, or the Ave Maria, would be whispered repeatedly, their familiar rhythms often acting as a calming mantra. You might pray to specific saints, known for their intercession in times of trouble, or for their association with sleep, like Saint Dymphna, for those suffering from mental anguish, or Saint Peter, who was miraculously freed from chains while sleeping. The act of prayer itself Focusing the mind on divine solace could reduce anxiety and quiet the restless thoughts that kept you awake. It was a form of medieval mindfulness, albeit one deeply rooted in faith. Penance was another crucial spiritual remedy, especially if you believed your insomnia was a punishment for sin. This could involve various acts: confession, seeking out a priest to confess your sins and receive absolution, was a direct path to spiritual cleansing, believed to remove the burden that weighed on your soul and, consequently, on your ability to sleep. Fasting, abstaining from food or specific types of food for a period, was a common form of penance, demonstrating humility and a willingness to suffer in order to gain God's favor. Vigil. For some, a sleepless night wasn't endured. It was embraced as a holy vigil, a conscious act of staying awake to pray, meditate, or keep watch, particularly during religious festivals or times of personal crisis. This transformed suffering into an act of devotion. Charitable acts. Performing good deeds, giving alms to the poor, or making pilgrimages were also forms of penance, believed to accrue spiritual merit and potentially alleviate divine displeasure. For those in monastic communities, as we discussed, sleeplessness could be integrated into the rigorous schedule of matins and other nocturnal prayers. But even for lay people, a restless night might become an opportunity for profound spiritual introspection rather than mere suffering. It was a chance to confront one's spiritual state and seek reconciliation. One quirky tidbit: some medieval texts describe specific prayers to be recited facing a certain direction or at particular times of the night to invoke more powerful spiritual aid for sleep. This blends the spiritual with a touch of folk magic, hinting at the era's holistic approach to well-being. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these spiritual remedies was purely psychological, the power of belief and ritual to reduce anxiety, or if medieval people genuinely experienced divine intervention in their quest for sleep. It's impossible to separate the two, as faith permeated every aspect of their understanding of health and illness. So, when the medieval night stretched endlessly before you, and neither herbs nor amulets brought relief, you turned to the ultimate source of comfort and control, God. Through fervent prayer and acts of penance, you sought not just sleep, but spiritual peace, hoping that a cleansed soul would finally be granted the gift of restful, boring oblivion. You've exhausted the spiritual solutions, turning to prayer and penance when sleep remained elusive. But in the medieval mind, the human body and its ailments weren't just influenced by God or demons, or even by internal humors. They were also profoundly susceptible to the vast celestial ballet above. This brings us to astrology's influence on sleep, where the positions of planets and stars were believed to hold sway over your nightly rest, dictating the best times for sleep, or even the most auspicious moments to seek a cure for insomnia. Imagine looking up at the night sky, not just with wonder, but with a deep conviction that every twinkling light held a specific influence over your terrestrial existence. Astrology was not seen as a separate occult practice from medicine or theology. It was an integral part of medieval scientific and philosophical thought, a complex system used to understand everything from personality traits to the progression of diseases. And, naturally, it extended to the delicate matter of sleep. Medieval astrology posited that each planet and zodiac sign had particular qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry, and associations that could affect the humors in your body. If your humors were out of balance, causing insomnia, an astrologer or physician well versed in astrology would consult the planetary alignments to understand the celestial influences at play. For instance, the moon being associated with moisture, and the nighttime was naturally linked to sleep. A good moon placement might promote restful sleep, while a bad aspect, perhaps a challenging alignment with another planet, could signify restlessness or vivid, disturbing dreams. Saturn, often associated with melancholy and cold, dry humors, was considered a planet that could predispose one to sleeplessness, particularly a melancholic kind of insomnia characterized by anxiety and dark thoughts. Conversely, Jupiter, associated with warmth and benevolence, might promote calm and restful slumber. The time of day and night, influenced by the ruling planet of the hour, was also considered. Physicians might advise you to sleep during certain planetary hours, believed to be more conducive to rest, or to avoid seeking remedies during times dominated by malefic planets that could exacerbate your condition. It was a complex, constantly shifting cosmic calendar that dictated optimum times for various activities, including when to lie down and invite sleep. Furthermore, astrological charts were sometimes used for diagnosis. If a patient presented with chronic insomnia, a physician might consult their birth chart, if available, to see if certain planetary placements predispose them to humoral imbalances or nervous agitation. The remedy might then be tailored not just to the humor, but to counteract the specific celestial influence. It was a personalized approach, albeit based on cosmic rather than biological factors. One quirky tidbit: some medieval medical texts even suggested that specific herbs, when gathered under particular planetary conjunctions, would be more potent for inducing sleep or healing ailments. This intertwined herbalism with astrology, believing the plant absorbed the celestial power. Historians still argue whether the elaborate astrological calculations were genuinely believed to provide direct medicinal efficacy, or if they offered a psychological framework for understanding and contextualizing suffering, giving both the healer and the patient a sense of order in a chaotic world. It was likely a blend of both, where belief in cosmic influence was profound. So when you wrestled with insomnia in medieval times, your plight was not just earthly. It was reflected in the stars, influenced by the silent dance of the planets. Your physician, perhaps gazing at the night sky, would consider whether the cold hand of Saturn was gripping your mind, preventing repose, or if a more benevolent constellation might soon grace you with the precious gift of boring unconscious slumber. You've plumbed the cosmic depths of astrology's influence on medieval sleep. But sometimes when herbal teas, warm baths, and even celestial alignments failed to bring rest, medieval medical practitioners turned to far more direct and often terrifying interventions. This leads us to bloodletting and purging, drastic measures employed to rebalance the humors and theoretically cure your stubborn insomnia. Imagine willingly submitting to a procedure that by modern standards seems more like torture than therapy, all in the desperate hope of finally falling asleep. As we discussed, humoral theory was the bedrock of medieval medicine. If an excess of a certain humor was causing your sleeplessness, perhaps too much hot blood making you agitated, or too much cold, dry, black bile causing melancholy and restlessness, the logical to them solution was to remove the offending fluid. This led to two incredibly common and often vigorously applied treatments. Bloodletting was perhaps the most ubiquitous medical procedure of the era, prescribed for an astonishing array of ailments, including insomnia. The belief was that removing excess or corrupted blood would restore balance. You would go to a barber surgeon or a physician, might perform it, who would make a small incision in a vein, often in the arm, but sometimes in the foot or even the forehead, allowing a measured amount of blood to drain into a bowl. The amount bled would vary, but it could be significant enough to induce weakness, faintness, and yes, often drowsiness. The theory was that by reducing the overall volume of blood, especially hot or turbulent blood, the body would be cooled and calmed, thereby facilitating sleep. If your insomnia was attributed to being too sanguine, too much bloodletting was a direct way to bring you back to equilibrium. It was often performed during specific lunar phases or planetary alignments, believed to be most effective. Then there was purging, an equally unpleasant and widely practiced method. This involved forcibly evacuating the bowels or inducing vomiting with the goal of expelling excess or corrupted humors that were believed to be causing illness. For insomnia especially, that linked to black bile or phlegm, a purgative might be administered. This could involve laxatives, potent herbal concoctions designed to induce violent bowel movements. Herbs like senna or rhubarb were commonly used, often with unpleasant side effects. Emetics, substances that induced vomiting, believed to expel humors from the upper body. These could be quite violent and debilitating. The logic was that if a humor was stagnant or in excess, causing internal agitation that prevented sleep, physically removing it from the body would restore the necessary balance for rest. The extreme discomfort and dehydration caused by these purges would undoubtedly leave you exhausted, potentially leading to a temporary, albeit miserable, slumber. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of sleep through sheer exhaustion. One particularly quirky tidbit: the color and consistency of the expelled fluids from purging were meticulously examined by physicians as they believed these details offered clues about the specific humoral imbalance at play. So, your suffering was not just endured, it was analyzed. Historians still argue whether these drastic measures offered any genuine therapeutic benefit beyond the powerful placebo effect and the sheer exhaustion they induced, or if they often did more harm than good, weakening already sick individuals. It's undeniable that for many, they caused significant discomfort and contributed to overall debility. So, when the medieval night stretched on and your humors remained stubbornly out of whack, you might find yourself lying on a cot, contemplating the cold steel of a barber surgeon's lancet, or the bitter taste of a potent purgative. The cure for your sleeplessness was often as terrifying as the sleeplessness itself, a stark reminder of the often brutal realities of medieval medicine, all in the desperate hope of finally achieving that boring unconscious embrace of sleep. You've braved the unsettling prospect of bloodletting and purging, all in the name of humoral balance and elusive sleep. But the medieval pharmacopoeia wasn't limited to herbs, diet, or bodily fluids. It stretched into the truly bizarre, sometimes employing ingredients that would make even the most hardened modern individual blanch. This brings us to peculiar animal-based cures, where everything from the humble earthworm to the fearsome wolf could find its way into a remedy for your sleepless nights. Imagine a medieval physician recommending a concoction that sounds more like a witch's brew than a medical prescription. You see, in the medieval understanding of the world, animals like plants were believed to possess specific properties that could be transferred to humans. These beliefs often blended ancient folklore, practical observation, and a generous dose of magical thinking. If a creature had a particular characteristic, say a snake's ability to shed its skin, symbolizing renewal, or a wolf's nocturnal habits, then parts of that creature might be used to invoke or counteract those very qualities. For insomnia particularly, if it was thought to be caused by supernatural forces or a particularly stubborn humoral imbalance, the remedies could become truly unsettling. Bat blood, or fat bats being creatures of the night, were logically associated with sleep and darkness. Some remedies suggested applying bat blood or fat to the temples or forehead to induce slumber. The idea was to literally transfer the bat's nocturnal nature to the sleepless individual. Wolf skin or gall. Wolves were powerful, sometimes terrifying, nocturnal creatures. For particularly persistent insomnia, especially if it was linked to a restless, agitated spirit, a small piece of wolf's skin, or even a concoction involving wolf's gall bile might be suggested. The intent was perhaps to either absorb the wolf's predatory calm in the dark or to scare away whatever kept you awake. Earthworms. These humble creatures, living deep within the earth, were often associated with grounding and stillness. Some medieval remedies for sleeplessness involved grinding up dried earthworms and mixing them into a poultice to be applied to the head or feet, or even consuming them in a liquid. The logic was that their earthy, grounding nature would pull the restless spirit down into repose. Owl's brain, or eggs. Owls, like bats, are quintessential nocturnal animals. Their eyes and brain were sometimes used in remedies believed to contain the essence of night vision and quiet wisdom. Owl eggs, too, might be consumed to absorb the creature's nocturnal tranquility. Mouse droppings, or brain. While less common for insomnia specifically, various parts of mice were used in other medieval remedies. For sleeplessness, one might encounter a desperate suggestion involving applying a paste made from mouse droppings or a mouse's brain, often believed to induce a deep, almost catatonic sleep. The preparation of these remedies was as varied as the ingredients. Some might be dried and powdered, mixed with wine or honey, applied as poultices, or even burned to produce a smoke to be inhaled. The efficacy was often believed to be tied not just to the ingredients, but to the precise ritual of preparation, the phase of the moon, or the recitation of specific charms. One particularly quirky tidbit: some texts suggest that simply wearing an amulet made from certain animal parts, like a wolf's tooth or a bat's wing, could be enough to ward off sleeplessness, relying on sympathetic magic rather than ingestion. Historians still argue whether these extreme animal-based remedies were commonly practiced or primarily existed in obscure medical manuscripts and folk traditions, perhaps as a last resort for truly desperate cases. It's likely they were less widespread than herbal remedies, but certainly illustrate the boundaries of medieval medical thought. So, when the medieval night offered no reprieve and the common cures failed, you might find yourself contemplating a truly bizarre concoction, hoping that the essence of a bat or the grounded stillness of an earthworm would finally drag you down into the boring, unconscious depths of sleep. It's a testament to the sheer desperation for rest in an era with few other options. You've bravely confronted the most peculiar animal-based remedies in the medieval quest for sleep. But who was prescribing these strange concoctions, or even the more mundane herbal teas and purges? This leads us to the physician's role, limited tools, and a varied, often unstandardized approach to medicine. Imagine seeking help from a medieval doctor, a figure revered for his learning, yet constrained by the scientific knowledge and practical limitations of his era. You see, the medieval physician was a scholar first and foremost. Their training typically involved studying ancient texts, primarily those of Hippocrates and Galen, filtered through Arab medical scholars like Avicenna and Rhazes. Their knowledge was theoretical, steeped in humoral theory, astrology, and a deep understanding of philosophical principles. They were educated often in universities and belonged to a respected, albeit small, elite. When you, as a sleepless patient, consulted a physician, they wouldn't immediately pull out a bottle of something. Their diagnostic process was comprehensive by medieval standards. They would inquire about your diet, your lifestyle, your temperament, your natural humoral balance, the position of the stars at your birth, or at the onset of your symptoms, and even the nature of your dreams. They would meticulously observe your urine. Uroscopy was a key diagnostic tool involving careful examination of color sediment, and even taste your pulse and your general demeanor. They were trying to build a complete humoral profile to pinpoint the exact imbalance causing your insomnia. Once a diagnosis was made, the remedies prescribed by a physician would typically aim to restore this humoral balance. This could involve dietary recommendations, specific foods to eat or avoid based on their humoral qualities, herbal preparations, often complex compounds of multiple herbs chosen for their combined effects on humors. These might be prepared by the physician themselves or by an apothecary. Regimen of life. Advice on exercise, rest, ironically, for insomnia, bathing, and even sexual activity, all tailored to maintain humoral equilibrium. More drastic interventions. As we discussed, they might prescribe bloodletting or purging, carefully calculating the amount and timing based on the patient's constitution and the celestial calendar. However, the physician's tools were, by modern standards, incredibly limited. They had no understanding of germ theory, no antibiotics, no anesthetics, and very few truly potent, consistent pharmacological agents beyond opium. Their treatments were often empirical. They saw it work on others, theoretical, based on humoral logic, or even ritualistic. They aimed to support the body's natural healing processes, or to remove perceived imbalances, rather than targeting specific pathogens or neurological pathways. One quirky tidbit: medieval physicians often considered the patient's social status and financial means when prescribing treatments. Expensive ingredients or lengthy regimens might only be offered to the wealthy, while simpler, more accessible remedies would be suggested for the poor. This wasn't necessarily cynical. It was a practical reality of the era's medical economics. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians, despite their theoretical framework, developed a practical, intuitive understanding of human physiology through extensive observation, or if their treatments were largely ineffective, relying heavily on the placebo effect and the body's natural resilience. It was likely a blend of both, with sincere effort, constrained by the limits of knowledge. So, for you, the sleepless medieval person visiting the physician was a serious affair. You put your faith in their ancient learning and their meticulous, if puzzling, methods. You hoped their diagnosis of your humors and their prescribed regimen, perhaps involving a special diet or a timely bleed, would finally bring you the elusive, boring peace of a truly restful medieval night. Their knowledge was vast, but their effective tools for directly inducing sleep were indeed few. You've just consulted the learned physician steeped in humoral theory, but for many of the more hands-on or immediately practical interventions, especially those involving physical manipulation or minor surgery, you wouldn't necessarily turn to the university-trained doctor. Instead, you'd find yourself in the capable, if sometimes crude hands of the barber surgeon's interventions. Imagine walking into a shop marked by the iconic red and white pole, hoping that the man who shaves faces and trims hair can also cure your ceaseless insomnia. You see, in the medieval period, the roles of physician, surgeon, and barber were often distinct, but sometimes overlapped, especially at the lower end of the medical hierarchy. Physicians were scholars, surgeons were craftsmen, barber surgeons were the most common practitioners for many minor medical procedures operating in their shops, which often doubled as barber shops. They were skilled with knives and razors, making them the go-to for anything requiring cutting or bleeding. For someone suffering from insomnia that was attributed to humoral imbalance, particularly an excess of blood, a sanguine temperament leading to agitation, the barber surgeon was the primary practitioner for bloodletting. While a physician might diagnose the need for it, the barber surgeon was the one who actually performed the procedure. You'd sit down, and with a lancet, a small sharp blade, they would make an incision in a vein, often in the arm, but sometimes in the hand-foot, or even the forehead, to draw out a specific amount of blood. This was done meticulously, with the goal of restoring humoral balance and thereby calming the system enough to induce sleep. The belief was that reducing the heat or fullness of the blood would bring rest. Beyond bloodletting, barber surgeons might also be involved in applying cupping, using heated cups to create suction on the skin, drawing blood to the surface, or even drawing it out through scarifications or applying leeches. Both methods were seen as localized forms of bloodletting designed to draw out bad blood or excess humors from specific areas of the body, which in theory could relieve congestion or agitation, contributing to sleeplessness. They might also assist with applying poultices and plasters containing sedative herbs to the head or temples, or preparing and administering purgatives or emetics. Although the specific recipes for these concoctions would likely come from a physician or an herbalist, the barber surgeon's role was more about the physical application of these remedies. Their interventions were often direct and immediate. Unlike the physician who might ponder humoral imbalances and astrological charts for days, the barber surgeon was equipped for action. This made them highly accessible and practical for many common folk, especially for acute complaints or perceived excesses that needed prompt physical intervention. One quirky tidbit: the red and white striped pole outside a barber surgeon's shop is said to represent the blood and bandages associated with their trade, a visible sign of their practical medical services. Historians still argue whether the physical discomfort and mild shock induced by procedures like bloodletting genuinely contributed to drowsiness, or if the strong belief in their efficacy was enough to bring about a temporary sense of relief and subsequent sleep. It was likely that the body's natural response to trauma, combined with the powerful placebo effect, played a significant role. So, when the medieval night dragged on and your humors needed a drastic adjustment, you'd find yourself in the capable, though not always gentle hands of the barber surgeon. Their sharp blades and practical methods were often the last resort, a powerful physical attempt to force your body into the boring, unconscious oblivion of sleep, even if the procedure itself was anything but boring. You have submitted to the barber surgeon's crude but direct interventions, hoping for the physical rebalancing that might bring sleep. Yet, in the medieval mind, your nocturnal experiences weren't just a physical state. They were a window into your soul, a reflection of your spiritual and humoral health. This leads us to the crucial dream interpretation's link to sleep quality, where the very nature of your dreams was believed to indicate the health of your sleep and indeed your overall well-being. Imagine waking from a night of troubled, fragmented sleep. Your physical discomfort might be secondary to the unsettling images that swam through your mind. For medieval people, the kind of dreams you had, their vividness, their emotional tenor, and their perceived clarity were all vital diagnostic tools. They weren't just random neurological firings. They were messages or symptoms that needed to be deciphered. If you had a truly good night's sleep, it was characterized by dreams that were calm, orderly, and crucially forgettable or easily dismissed. A light, undisturbed sleep was often seen as the ideal, suggesting a body and mind in proper humoral balance, free from spiritual torment. These dreams might be pleasant, reflecting a peaceful state of mind, or simply fleeting and indistinct, indicating a truly deep, unburdened slumber. Conversely, disturbed sleep was almost always accompanied by specific kinds of dreams, which were seen as symptomatic of an underlying problem. Nightmares, incubi, and succubi. These terrifying dreams were often attributed to demonic attacks or malevolent spirits literally sitting on your chest, causing a feeling of pressure, suffocation, and extreme terror. What we now call sleep paralysis. Such dreams indicated serious spiritual affliction or intense fear. Vivid, agitating dreams. Dreams filled with chaotic imagery, anger, or intense fear, even if not outright nightmares, were often interpreted as a sign of an excess of hot or dry humors, particularly yellow bile, choleric temperament, or even too much blood, sanguine agitation. These suggested an overheated or overly active mind, unable to settle down. Dark, melancholic dreams. If your dreams were persistently gloomy, filled with sorrow, despair, or dark imagery, this was a clear sign of an excess of black bile, indicating a melancholic temperament that needed to be purged or balanced. Prophetic or divine dreams. While unsettling dreams indicated imbalance, clear, unambiguous dreams, particularly those with spiritual messages or prophecies often seen in the dreams of saints or devout individuals, were considered positive, indicating a receptive soul and a privileged connection to the divine. Medieval dream interpretation was often linked to the humoral theory. Dreams of fire heat or passionate acts might signify an excess of yellow bile. Dreams of water, cold or slow-moving things could point to an excess of phlegm. Dreams of violence or intense emotion might suggest blood imbalance. The content of your dreams was a direct reflection of your internal physiological and spiritual state. One quirky tidbit: some medieval medical texts offered advice on how to avoid bad dreams by altering diet, sleeping position, or engaging in specific prayers before bed. This shows an active, if rudimentary, attempt at dream management to ensure quality sleep. Historians still argue whether medieval people consciously used their dream content as a diagnostic tool, or if the interpretations were more a post hoc rationalization to fit existing medical theories. It's likely that a troubling dream genuinely spurred an inquiry into one's health, both physical and spiritual. So when you awoke from a medieval night of troubled sleep, you didn't just feel groggy. You scrutinized the memories of your dreams, knowing that their very nature, whether terrifying, chaotic, or mournful, held vital clues about the health of your body and soul. The quest for boring, unremarkable sleep was not just about rest. It was about achieving a state of internal balance so perfect that your dreams, too, became calm, serene, and utterly forgettable. You've just analyzed your dreams, seeing them as direct indicators of your internal state, a window into your humoral and spiritual balance. But even the perfect humoral balance achieved through diet, herbs, and spiritual cleansing could be undone by the relentless realities of medieval life. This brings us to the profound impact of environmental factors: noise and light, the constant, often inescapable external elements that dictated the quality of medieval nocturnal rest, or the lack thereof. Imagine your medieval existence. Your home is often a single, multi-purpose room shared with family, perhaps even livestock in poorer dwellings, especially in winter, for warmth. Privacy is a luxury, and quiet is almost unheard of. Noise was a pervasive and unavoidable element of medieval life, both by day and by night. Human noise. Your neighbors are not far off: their conversations, their domestic squabbles, their occasional late-night revelry or cries of distress. In towns, there might be the distant shouts of watchmen, the clatter of artisans working early or late, or the sounds from nearby taverns. Inside your own dwelling, the rustling of straw, bedding, the creaking of timber, the snoring of family members, and the movements of children or pets would all contribute to a constant low hum of domestic sound. Animal noise. Livestock, whether kept indoors or just outside, were a source of perpetual noise. Chickens, clucking, pigs, grunting, cows, lowing, dogs, barking, and donkeys braying. In the countryside, the calls of nocturnal birds, the rustling of unseen creatures in the nearby woods, or the distant howling of wolves, if you were really out in the wilds, would complete the cacophony. Environmental noise. The wind howling through cracks, the rain drumming on a thatched roof, the drip of water from leaks, or the crackling of a nearby fire, all added to the atmospheric sounds that were far from conducive to quiet repose. Then there was light, or more accurately, the profound lack of it, followed by its abrupt intrusion, natural darkness, with no artificial light sources beyond expensive candles or smoky rushlights. Nightfall brought an almost absolute darkness. This meant that any light, however small, could be disruptive. The moon, if full and bright, could cast significant light through an unglazed window. Firelight. The hearth, the center of most medieval homes, was a constant source of flickering light. Even when banked for the night, embers would glow, and any stirring of the fire would send dancing shadows across the room, constantly engaging the eyes, preventing the deep darkness needed for strong melatonin production, though they certainly didn't know about that. Early morning light. There were no blackout curtains. As dawn approached, the first hint of light would seep through unglazed windows or gaps in the walls, naturally signaling the body to wake often before you felt truly rested. Your day, much like the peasant's existence, was tied to the sun's schedule. One quirky tidbit: some medieval medical texts actually suggested that sleeping with too much light, even from the moon, could cause coldness in the head and disturb dreams. This shows an early intuitive understanding of light's impact on sleep, even if the underlying rationale was steeped in humoral theory. Historians still argue whether medieval people simply developed a higher tolerance for these environmental disturbances, or if chronic sleep deprivation was a much more widespread, unacknowledged problem than we realize, contributing to their perceived melancholy or irritability. It's hard to imagine anyone sleeping through such a constant barrage. So, as you settled onto your medieval pallet, wrapped in your rough wool blanket, you were not just battling internal humors and external demons. You were locked in a nightly struggle against the inescapable sounds of life, the ever-present flicker of firelight, and the sudden intrusion of dawn. These environmental factors were a constant, often overwhelming barrier to achieving that deep, uninterrupted, gloriously boring medieval sleep. You've just been subjected to the relentless noise and light that defined medieval nights, a constant assault on peaceful slumber. But while environmental factors affected everyone, the quality and experience of sleep were far from universal. This brings us to social status and sleep quality, revealing how your place in the rigid medieval hierarchy profoundly dictated your nocturnal comforts or lack thereof. Imagine the vast chasm between a lord's gilded bedchamber and a serf's shared straw pallet. Let's begin with the peasantry and the urban poor. This vast majority of the population lived in conditions that made restful sleep incredibly challenging. Your home, a simple cottage, or a crowded city dwelling, was often a single room. Shared sleeping spaces. Entire families, sometimes even multiple families or lodgers, would share a single room or even a single bed, a large communal sleeping platform. This was partly for warmth, partly for security and partly due to sheer lack of space. Privacy was a non-existent concept. Imagine the cacophony of multiple snorers, restless children, and perhaps even domestic animals, like chickens or pigs kept inside for warmth, sharing your immediate vicinity. Rudimentary bedding. Your bed would likely be a straw-filled mattress or a simple pallet laid directly on the dirt floor or on a low wooden frame. Straw was cheap, but harbored fleas, lice, and other vermin, ensuring constant itching and disturbance. It needed frequent changing, but this was a chore. Lack of climate control. Exposure to the elements was unavoidable. Cold, damp air in winter, often exacerbated by a leaky, drafty dwelling, and stifling heat in summer, made comfortable sleep difficult. Fireplaces provided some warmth, but also smoke and flickering light, as we discussed. Physical exhaustion and anxiety. While physical labor could induce sleep, the sheer exhaustion often came with pain and chronic discomfort. Coupled with the constant anxiety of poverty, hunger, disease, and potential violence, a truly peaceful deep sleep was a rare luxury. Now, ascend the ladder to the wealthy merchant class or minor nobility. Their homes were larger perhaps, with dedicated sleeping chambers offering a semblance of privacy. Separate bedrooms. You might have your own room, or at least share it only with your spouse. This afforded a degree of quiet and personal space that was unimaginable for the poor. More comfortable bedding. Beds would be larger with proper wooden frames and mattresses filled with more luxurious materials like wool or even feathers, offering far greater comfort and less vermin, though fleas were still a universal problem. Tapestries and curtains. Heavy tapestries on the walls and bed curtains, like those around a four-poster bed, weren't just decorative. They provided crucial insulation against drafts and helped to dampen noise, creating a darker, quieter, and warmer sleeping environment. Reduced physical strain. Different anxieties. While not immune to anxiety, their worries shifted from basic survival to matters of business, social standing, and political intrigue. These anxieties could still cause insomnia, but the physical environment was significantly improved. Finally, at the pinnacle, consider the high nobility and royalty. Their sleep environments were designed for maximum comfort and security. Luxurious bedchambers, elaborate, well-insulated rooms, often with fireplaces for warmth, fine linens and beds, opulent beds with deep, soft mattresses, fine linens and heavy, elaborate bed hangings that created a virtually enclosed, private, and dark space within the room, minimizing light and noise. Servants and security. A retinue of servants would ensure comfort, and guards would provide security, alleviating fears of intrusion. Intellectual and political worries. Their sleeplessness when it occurred might stem from the weight of governance, political machinations, or dynastic concerns, but their physical environment was optimized for rest. One quirky tidbit, despite their comforts, even royalty sometimes slept sitting up or semi-reclined, believing it was healthier for digestion or to prevent certain humors from accumulating in the brain. Historians still argue whether the physical hardships faced by the lower classes inherently led to worse sleep health, or if their bodies simply adapted to the conditions more readily than their wealthier counterparts, who had different, perhaps more psychological forms of sleep disruption. It's clear, however, that material comfort offered a direct pathway to a more conducive sleeping environment. So, as you imagine yourself settling down for the night, remember that your status in medieval society profoundly influenced whether your path to boring unconscious oblivion was a constant battle against fleas and cold, or a luxurious descent into a quiet curtained haven. Sleep, like so much else, was a privilege in the Middle Ages. You've just explored how profoundly social status influenced the quality of medieval sleep, from the peasant's straw to the noble's silken bed. But as the medieval period waned, giving way to the Renaissance, and beyond, the very intellectual framework that underpinned many of these sleep cures began to shift. This brings us to the decline of humoral theory, a slow but inevitable intellectual unraveling that would over centuries redefine medicine and, by extension, how sleeplessness was understood and treated. Imagine the foundational understanding of the body held sacred for over 1,000 years, beginning to crack under the weight of new observations and experimental approaches. You see, for more than a millennium, Galen's elaborate system of humors had provided a comprehensive, if ultimately incorrect, explanation for health and disease. It was taught in every university, informed every diagnosis, and dictated every treatment, from bloodletting to dietary advice. For insomnia, it offered a clear, albeit often unhelpful diagnosis, an imbalance of blood bile or phlegm, often black bile, causing melancholy. However, from the late medieval period into the Renaissance, subtle cracks began to appear in this monolithic theory. Anatomical discoveries. Pioneering anatomists, like Andreas Vesalius in the 16th century, began to meticulously dissect human bodies, revealing a far more complex and intricate internal structure than humoral theory had accounted for. Their detailed drawings and observations challenged the simplistic notions of humors flowing through the body in a balanced way. New observations of disease. As medical practitioners accumulated more experience, they began to notice that certain diseases didn't quite fit the humoral mold. While they still didn't understand germ theory, the increasing specificity of disease descriptions hinted at causes beyond mere imbalance. The rise of empiricism. A growing emphasis on direct observation and experimentation rather than blind adherence to ancient texts slowly gained traction. Scientists and physicians began to demand evidence that went beyond logical deduction from a theoretical framework. If a treatment didn't consistently produce observable results, its humoral justification started to look shaky. The decline wasn't a sudden, dramatic overthrow. It was a gradual erosion, more like a slow leak than a burst dam. Physicians continued to refer to humors for centuries, but increasingly they added other observations or adapted the theory to accommodate new findings. They might still talk about hot and cold qualities of food, but their understanding of how these affected the body became more nuanced, eventually divorcing from the strict humoral categorizations. For insomnia, this meant that while initial treatments might still involve herbal preparations aimed at soothing or cooling humors, there was a growing openness to other explanations or observations. Perhaps it wasn't just too much black bile. Perhaps it was about nerve agitation, or even factors related to lifestyle, though the specific mechanisms were still largely unknown. One quirky tidbit about this transition: even as humoral theory faded, some of its terminology lingered in common language. You might still hear someone described as sanguine, optimistic, lively; from blood, choleric, irritable; from yellow bile, phlegmatic, calm; unemotional from phlegm; or melancholic, sad, contemplative, from black bile. These terms, though stripped of their strict medical meaning, are a linguistic fossil of this once dominant theory. Historians still argue whether the long persistence of humoral theory was due to intellectual inertia, the lack of a superior alternative for over 1,000 years, or simply its intuitive appeal as a comprehensive system for understanding the human body. Ultimately, as medieval scientific thought gave way to the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, the elaborate edifice of humoral theory began to crumble. This opened the door for new ways of understanding the human body and its ailments, including the mysterious problem of sleeplessness. The shift was slow, laborious, and marked by many false starts, but it eventually liberated medicine from its ancient chains, paving the way for a more scientific approach to finding that boring, elusive good night's sleep. You've witnessed the slow intellectual decline of humoral theory, a fundamental shift that paved the way for modern medical understanding. But ideas, particularly those connected to deeply ingrained practices, don't simply vanish overnight. Instead, they often persist, evolving and transforming in the realm of folk wisdom and household remedies. This brings us to the fascinating legacy in folk medicine, where many medieval insomnia cures found a quieter, more enduring life passed down through generations, long after formal medicine had moved on. Imagine your grandmother's grandmother, perhaps still brewing a tea, or recommending a practice that echoes remedies from centuries past. You see, while university-trained physicians gradually abandoned humoral theory and its more extreme practices like bloodletting, ordinary people continued to rely on what seemed to work, what was accessible, and what had been passed down from their elders. This oral tradition, combined with practical experience, formed the backbone of folk medicine, a parallel system of healing that often coexisted with and sometimes directly influenced formal medical practice. Many of the gentler medieval remedies for insomnia, particularly the herbal ones, survived and thrived in this folk tradition. Chamomile tea, for instance, remains a popular bedtime beverage even today. recognized for its calming properties. Its journey from medieval monastic gardens and apothecaries to your modern kitchen cabinet is a direct lineage. Valerian root, despite its pungent aroma, continues to be used as a natural sleep aid and anxiolytic, anxiety-reducing agent in many cultures, a testament to its long-observed sedative effects. The idea of a warm glass of milk with honey before bed is another enduring piece of folk wisdom directly traceable to medieval dietary recommendations for sleep. Its soothing properties, both physiological and psychological, have transcended centuries of changing medical paradigms. Even the concept of a hop pillow stuffing dried hops into a cushion for inhalation persists in some natural health circles, a direct echo of a common medieval practice. Beyond specific ingredients, some of the broader principles also endured. The idea that certain foods are heavy or light and can affect sleep, or that stress and agitation lead to sleeplessness, are intuitions that predate modern science but align with it in many ways. The psychological comfort derived from a ritual, whether a prayer, a specific bath, or the preparation of a traditional remedy, also remained a powerful, if unacknowledged, factor in promoting sleep. The use of charms and amulets, while no longer sanctioned by mainstream religion or medicine, often mutated into more secular superstitions or comforting rituals. Tucking a lucky charm under your pillow for good dreams, or performing a small personal ritual to ward off bad thoughts before sleep, are distant relatives of the medieval use of blessed objects and apotropaic texts. One quirky tidbit: some of the more bizarre medieval cures, particularly those involving animal parts, might occasionally resurface in isolated folk traditions or become fodder for sensationalized accounts, demonstrating the enduring human fascination with the esoteric and the powerfully strange. Historians still argue whether the persistence of these folk remedies is due to their genuine, albeit mild, efficacy, the strong placebo effect of traditional practices, or simply the comfort of familiarity and ritual in the face of suffering. It is likely a potent combination of all these factors. So, as you prepare for your own night's rest, know that you are in a small way participating in a living legacy. The simple rituals you might follow, the comforting teas you might drink, or the very idea of food as a means to promote sleep, all carry the faint soothing echoes of medieval wisdom. The long winding history of treating insomnia wasn't just about grand theories and drastic measures. It was also about the quiet, persistent comfort found in the humble, enduring traditions of folk medicine, helping countless people then and now find their way to boring, unconscious oblivion. You've followed the winding path of medieval insomnia cures, from their humoral foundations to their lingering echoes in folk medicine. We've explored the strange concoctions, the spiritual battles, and the stark environmental realities. And as we finally draw this long, detailed story to a close, we are left with a timeless truth: the enduring mysteries of sleep a fundamental human experience that, despite millennia of inquiry and innovation, continues to fascinate, elude, and ultimately humble us. Imagine yourself in the quiet of your room now. You might have a smart bed, a sleep tracking app, noise-canceling headphones, and a perfectly regulated environment. Yet even with all these modern marvels, there are still nights when sleep simply won't come, or when your dreams are vivid and unsettling. This shared experience connects you directly to that medieval peasant scratching at fleas on their straw pallet, or the anxious nobleman pacing his bedchamber. The fundamental human need for sleep and its often frustrating elusiveness remains unchanged. In the Middle Ages, they attributed insomnia to demons, imbalanced humors, or divine displeasure. They sought remedies in poppy syrups, wolf gall, and endless prayers. They poured their anxieties into bloodletting and purges, hoping to physically excise the restlessness. Their efforts, while often misguided by modern science, were born from a desperate, universal human longing for respite, for that daily oblivion that resets the mind and body. Today we talk about neurotransmitters, circadian rhythms, sleep cycles, and the psychological functions of dreams. We have sophisticated pharmaceuticals, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, and an ever-growing body of scientific research. Yet, despite all this knowledge, the precise mechanism of consciousness fading into unconsciousness, the vivid, often illogical narratives of our dreams, and the exact restorative processes of sleep remain areas of active, often puzzling scientific inquiry. The why and how of sleep are still not fully solved. The medieval quest for boring, unremarkable sleep highlights a core human trait, our relentless desire to understand and control the unknown. They systematized it, spiritualized it, even demonized it. They believed they could measure it, balance it, and force it. While their specific methods might seem quaint or even horrifying, now their underlying intent to achieve restful slumber and understand what happens in the dark is identical to yours. One quirky tidbit considering our long journey is that some contemporary approaches to sleep, particularly in the wellness movement, sometimes echo medieval sensibilities without even realizing it. The emphasis on natural remedies, calming rituals before bed, and even dietary adjustments for better sleep often mirror the intuitive, holistic, if unscientific approaches of our medieval ancestors. Historians still argue whether this cyclical return to natural methods reflects a deep-seated human wisdom or a repeated dismissal of hard-won scientific understanding. As the sounds of your own modern environment soften and your eyelids grow heavy, take a moment to appreciate the enduring mystery of sleep. It is a daily miracle, a universal human experience that transcends time and technology. The medievals struggled to find it, the curious cures they devised, and the profound questions they asked about its nature were all part of humanity's long, often boring, but endlessly fascinating quest to understand the precious gift of nocturnal oblivion. May your own journey tonight be peaceful, profound, and utterly boring.